No man has had a greater impact on civilization than the man Christ Jesus, called the Redeemer, who has stood at the center of art, culture, and religion for 2,000 years and continues to do so, but who was the man in real life. Official history is typically written by the victor to serve its objectives. History thus becomes what the victor says it is. In the case of Jesus, the Empire of Rome had declared itself the victor. It executed the man, persecuted his followers, and after failing for 2 centuries to eradicate his ideology, it reversed its position, deified the man, and made his ideology the official state religion, with its history enshrined in Gospels for which no corroborating historic documents exist. The point is that all that we know about the man Christ Jesus comes to us from the Church of Rome that became established in the service of empire under its political objectives. This means that the real history of the man evidently lies outside the official framework and remains yet to be discovered. On this path of opening the curtain of history to the truth, some rather exciting prospects come to light, because if one looks at the man's history from the vantage point of modern science, with the eye of scientific honesty, the man Christ Jesus comes potentially to light far bigger in stature and reverence than has appeared on the surface for the past 2 millennia, with vast implications for modern civilization. What appears to be most lacking, therefore, on the modern scene of religious spirituality is the development of an understanding of what is actually true about the man, what he represented and still represents, which religiosity has hidden, which has the potential to bridge the dividing gap between religions, cultures, and politics. A great diversity of religions has been spun around the historic lack of truth. But truth is unfortunately hard to come by in a landscape of ingrained diversity, interlaced with persecutions, inhumanity, built-up hatred, and cultivated ignorance. It seems that humanity has become trapped thereby, in a history that requires healing. The simple fact that humanity has become subjected to numerous opposing religions, many with dehumanizing features that pit one against the other, spiritually and civilly, from which the horrors of the Dark Ages had emerged, does not mean that humanity cannot free itself of its long entrapment into false perceptions by taking a fresh look to discover the truth. This all by itself would inject into religion, culture, and even politics the revival of the profoundly human focus that Christ Jesus represented, which is also the universal divine focus. The recognition of humanity as the image of God, if it became developed in a more honest and scientific fashion, would close the door on poverty, thievery, fascism, terror, genocide, war, and so on, that have become ever more prominent, a disease that has not yet been healed, though many have tried. An early attempt had been made with Augustine's work in the 5th century, the City of God concept, to raise the Christian ideology to a Renaissance level, in the shadow of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, the self-declared model for civilization. The Golden Renaissance, 1,000 years later, resulted from another step in that direction. It stands as an historic example of what can be achieved along the line of raising humanity closer to the recognition of it as the image of God. The Golden Renaissance was started by an advanced process in which the divinely human focus was becoming more widely developed and intertwined with beauty in the arts, music, science, culture, justice, and philosophy. The Renaissance was remarkably successful along this line. It had raised both the face of religion and of human worth and dignity. It has created a new platform for civilization that stood tall for more than a century before it was destroyed again by war and religiosity for the destruction of the truth that it had once brought to the surface. The Renaissance was destroyed as a project by the Empire of Venice that was built on the ashes of Rome. Venice had managed to twist its inherited imperial fascism into religious terrorism that ultimately set the stage for the 30 Years' War, the most brutal escapade of military atrocities prior to the 20th century. The 30 Years' War went a long way to destroy what the Renaissance had accomplished, with effects lingering far beyond the war itself. A flood of gold resulted from the ensuing religious warfare, becoming universal war with ever-increasing insanity, by which the human focus drifted far out of sight. We need to have humanity liberated on this front from inhuman divisions, whatever their nature may be, for us to become free to reach a hand across the table to one another towards a new renaissance and beyond. A deep-reaching new renaissance is ever more required as a necessity for us all to go on living on this planet. A great task looms before us to master the Ice Age challenge that now stands on the near-term horizon, beginning possibly as soon as 30 years from now. The Ice Age begins with the sun going inactive, possibly in a space of a single day, whereby it loses 70% of its energy output. Plenty of evidence exists for this to be happening. And the event will be huge. It will upset everything. With a near three-quarter loss of solar energy, Canada, Russia, Europe, and parts of the USA and China become a snowflake. The solar system is rich with evidence that our sun is electrically powered, depending on external inputs, by which it can fail, whereby the Ice Age begins. If we keep lying to ourselves about the physical evidence, we won't build the infrastructures to secure our physical existence. Under an inactive sun with these small-minded lies, society commits its children to death, and itself with it. Mars is loaded with evidence of large-scale electric actions in the solar system. It brings cosmic electricity to light as an immense resource we can tap into, but humanity obediently closes its eyes and denies its existence. This means that our future existence on this planet depends on our spiritual development that combats our long-cultivated sense of impotence, finity, and limitation. This is precisely the kind of self-made blindness that Christ Jesus had been combating in his time already in a less severe context. We need his wisdom on this front now more than ever. Without the utilization of cosmic electric energy, humanity won't have a hope for survival. Most of our oil energy resources will be used up in 60 years. Our nuclear power resources will last a bit longer. But ultimately, all of our energy resources are of a depletable type. They are finite. None will last us through the next 90,000-year Ice Age, much less forever. Our future depends on us developing our human resources, the spiritual resources of our humanity as discoverers and creators. Cosmic electric energy is infinitely available. It is not a depletable resource. It is at hand. But we won't take hold of it for as long as we lie to ourselves that it doesn't exist. Christ Jesus has evidently experience in dealing with such liars as modern society has become that cares nothing about its future, much less than that of its children. The current lying of society to itself, such as with the dream of global warming, poses a challenge so immense that the Ice Age challenge can only be met on an universal Renaissance-type foundation. Nothing less will be sufficient to meet and master the challenge. Once the Ice Age kicks in, most of the current freshwater resources will no longer exist. While the technologies exist for creating infinite freshwater supplies, the infrastructure won't be built for it, for as long as the Ice Age before us is denied. An immensely critical task, therefore, now lies before us. It should all by itself inspire us to transform our civilization into the greatest spiritual citadel of all time, with greater power for good than anything that has yet been achieved on this planet. And this brings us back to the historic master in the spiritual realm, the man named Christ Jesus, who had dealt with such challenges in facing Rome. History is full of proofs that civilization is not primarily the outcome of technology, or of an economy, or of a political process, but is the sum total of all of these efficiently drawn together by a spiritual perception that raises the status of humanity and gives it a profoundly divine face. In this context, true spiritual factors have a vital role to play for the protection and advance of civilization and its development, such as the unfolding recognition of truth and love. What would Jesus' message be to our age, speaking not as God's special incarnation, as he is often seen, which sets him apart from humanity into an isolated sphere with special powers, who would, instead, be speaking to us as a fully human being, though as one with a long history of profound spiritual and scientific self-development, built on the wisdom of the ages, and garnered from many countries. He would say that we make the same mistake in our time that the people made in his time, which was afterwards compounded massively for political purposes. They had cast me into the role of a healer, he would say to us, as he may have said to the people in his time. The rulers came to me and told me to restrict myself to healing the sick and the lame, and keep my nose out of everything else, and not to speak the truth about it. But how could I? The truth is the truth. The businessmen steal and call it profit. The politicians rape society by aiming to subdue it with fear and impotence. The religions torture society with threats of doom by sin, which they arbitrarily define. Universal love is blocked, and morality simply means blind obedience. How can a human civilization be built on that? I have made it my mission to not only heal the sick, but also to raise the dead, the spiritually dead, to cleanse the lepers, and to cast out demons. The leaders wanted to circumcise my mission, and throw 3/4 of it away as trash. I gave an answer they didn't like. I told them that healing the sick is easy. Anyone can do this. The sick want to be healed. Raising the living dead is a bit harder because one has to wake them up first, and they don't want to let go of their slumber. Cleansing the lepers is harder still because it means washing off the intensely hypocritical scum that mars the face of society that has lost its humanity. Who focuses any more on meeting the human need? By meeting the human need, the debt to God and to one another is extinguished. I made it a part of the prayer to extinguish this debt, but nobody hears it. The focus is now on greed, which is a slap in the face of God. But the hardest of all is casting out demons, the demons of small-minded thinking. I made this too a part of the prayer. They simply changed the prayer. I said, "Protect us from small-minded thinking." They changed it to, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." They said by it being non-specific, it can mean anything that one cares to define it as, which they did, as they wished. In a way, they did circumcise my mission, he would say to us today. All that they gave the world to remember me by is that I was a healer, and the world paid a steep price for this circumcision that cut away 3/4 of what I was committed to give to the world. With the religions that society has built around the little that was left, the dark ages were created that followed. The many churches that were built in my name, which they gave many names, have played a monopoly role in spiritual issues, each in its own way, for all the ages that followed, even while they have all failed to develop in their chosen role, to create in society a higher level human focus. This means that the Pharisees and the masters of Rome had won. I have illustrated the Christ for humanity, the spiritual idea of God, that is in every human heart and soul. It should have started a new direction towards enabling society to step away from the monopoly games of religions, and develop in human society a spiritual dimension of itself and for itself. This appears to be the only thing that survived the ages which dogmas have not yet destroyed. You have an obvious need to get back to this focus onto truth that supersedes doctrine, small-minded thinking, and spiritual death, and to build up a foundation for scientific honesty that supersedes doctrinal conventions. Spirituality needs to build on what is real, or else humanity remains dead. If the required spiritualizing system that can get you to this point didn't exist, that is if I hadn't created it and exemplified it for you, then you would have had to create such a system yourself. I spared you the footsteps, I did it for you. I gave you the Christ, developed to the highest level possible within the framework of my time. Now the task is up to you, Jesus might say, to use what I gave you, and heal the modern society with it, which has been grounded over many ages in small-minded thinking and religiosity that have both become infested over many centuries with terrorizing fictions and a dead scene on the spiritual level. It becomes your task now in your age to restore to humanity its evident divine status, even to where the spiritual perception of humanity can fulfill its vital God-appointed role. It is now your task to restore what has become spiritually lacking for such long periods that hardly anyone remembers anymore what once was. But will you fulfill your task? Your answer will determine for you whether you will meet and master the Ice Age challenge before you, or whether you will remain spiritually dead and fade into oblivion as though you had never lived. And the place to begin in searching for an answer is to reach for the truth. All fictions vanish when the face of truth is shining through. The path to the future begins with open minds and hearts searching for the truth and discovering the truth, which thereby becomes re-established in your age as the truth. This is the only way of how you can stop wars, poverty, slavery, and genocide, which are all built on fiction. You go to war not out of strength, but out of weakness, out of your inability to deal with one another as human beings. This is the truth. War is built on fiction. If Jesus had said these things, he would likely have been right. I wrote a novel on this subject some decades ago. The story is about a cataclysmic or event in which long-cherished fictions lost their relevance, by which the underlying universal love tends to shine through on its own without anyone pushing it, because it alone is real and substantial. I have named the novel, Brighter Than the Sun. On this path, the dogmas that had once divided humanity for many centuries, and have alienated people from one another, lose their luster, and fade into oblivion as mindless impositions. Then, and only then, when insanity becomes vacated by advanced recognitions of the wonders of our humanity, will the winds of war and etc. fade away and become forgotten, and an era of prosperity begins, and so forth. Thus it becomes evident that an open exploration is required, unrestrained by small-minded thinking, of the life of the one man who has become the most controversial, and also the most accomplished man in the spiritual history of mankind, of the man who has become the center not only of numerous doctrines, rituals, ceremonies, beliefs, and ideologies, but who also stands revered for his amazing teachings and astonishing healing. The man Christ Jesus, with whom a vast segment of humanity identifies itself as Christianity. It is amazing in this context to note how extremely little is factually known about this man and his accomplishments and teachings. As I said before, almost all that society knows about him is conveyed in the canonical writings by the Church of Rome, primarily in its 4 Gospels, for which no corroborating historic documents exist. Since the canonical writings were produced by the Church of the Roman Empire that had executed the man Christ Jesus in the first place, whose ideology and history, after 2 centuries of persecution, became suddenly the subject of the official Gospels, wherein the man became deified in a strange manner, one cannot help but wonder how much of what is generally known about the man is true, and how is fiction written into history to serve the political purposes of the Empire of Rome. The underlying uncertainty leaves the field wide open to conjecture. It is far more likely, in the shadow of this uncertainty, that scientific reconstruction of the man's history yields a clearer and more useful perception of man than the official versions convey. The Empire of Rome is well known for its persecution of progressive perceptions. Since the masters of Rome couldn't erase the Christ ideology by killing the man who exemplified it, they persecuted the followers. That much is documented history. That the wave of persecution was carried forward by the Church itself all the way through the Dark Ages, eradicated many outstanding leaders and advanced thinkers through the centuries in numerous gory spectacles with increasing brutality, is likewise documented history. Also, that the crucifixion was evidently deemed to be not cruel enough, so that the victims were increasingly burned alive at the stake from the days of Rome all the way to the terror orgies of the religious Inquisition, and beyond, with the names of God and Christ flying on the banners overhead that justified the killing. Is likewise documented history. With the Empire of Rome reversing its position, after 2 centuries of persecution, by suddenly transforming the persecuted ideology into a useful state religion, as the Christian Church of Rome gained dominance, which produced the canonical writings, is also documented history. Only the facts about the life and teachings of Christ Jesus are still left open to conjectures, as the historic documents that may have existed have evidently become lost in the fires of the persecutions. Fortunately, some scripts have survived in far-off places. Those speak of an extraordinary man who lived at the time with an outstanding spiritual stature, which suggests that the man may have been Christ Jesus. One thing that history seems to tell us with great certainty, and potentially verifies, is that Christ Jesus had been a brilliant man with great abilities to heal, and with a message with such an uplifting power for humanity, that it shook the mighty Roman Empire to its very core, so that it caused Rome to launch an extensive effort to stomp it out. What is being reported through the Gospels may therefore represent only a minuscule portion of what the man really was, and that little was likely twisted to serve the political purposes of the empire and of the religions that ruled at the time. But if we look for that which is not known, and peel the obvious fictions away from what has been made known, an amazing story begins to present itself, which this exploration series is designed to explore.